the Mishna Berurah. We are in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Kuf Nun Daled. We are in the section known as the laws of the synagogue, the Hilchos Beis Knesses. We did chapter 154, halachos 1, 2, 3, and 4 last time. There's a lot to learn, some really cool stuff was going on in our understanding of when we could change things out in a Torah, in a shul, and which things are considered holy that need to stay in the shul, what things are just used for holy things. So now we need to kind of figure out what to do with the stuff that is, worn out. So what do we do with it? Once we say that it's holy, and that we can't use it for other stuff, you can't turn an old Sefer Torah cover into a dish rag, for example. You don't want to do that. That would be unseemly. So what is the seemly thing to do? So now we're in halacha hey, the fifth halacha in here. So a Sefer Torah that has worn out. Okay. So they don't really explain over here what that means, that it's worn out. But usually what that means is that you have the letters are rubbed out is a problem, and it'd be very difficult to go ahead and fix a lot of them. That issue was more common when they just used the gallnut ink without using a waterproofing agent. Nowadays, use a material that helps to waterproof the ink, so it's much more resilient than it was in the old days. I've actually seen Sefer Torah that are 200 to 300 years old, or at least that's what they tell me. But to be fair, they do look rather aged, and the letters do look a lot different than the way we write them today. They're not as clean and not as crisp. So when those start to, when they get exposed to moisture, or the fingers are touching them and they're kissing them, or you're all that all the time, people take the taluses and they like that the whole page, thinking it's not going to do anything. Well, it used to just be, just soot and water to make the ink. Don't know why people thought that was not going to hold in place. So that gets rubbed out. Or holes start to develop in the actual cloth itself just because of its age. And if it's treated right, it can last for hundreds of years. We just got lucky with the Dead Sea Scrolls that those lasted for a couple thousand years. Quick joke before I continue on with the halacha over here. As long as you keep all these pages acid-free, the pages will last for a long time. So I saw this guy who was talking about all these fantastic Bibles he had from his collection. He said, "Here's one I have from 1795. This is an interesting one because this is known as the Killer Bible." And have some quote from the New Testament. It talks about killing the children, which was kind of funny. So I made a Anakin Skywalker reference when it came to that. And then he said, and then I have an even older Bible from 1600, which was, I think he said was the, I forget how he described that one. So I went and commented that, I've seen a copy of the Bible from 2,000 years ago, but didn't have the second volume in it. Dead Sea Scrolls. And also the Aleppo Codex, I've seen that as well. So Sefer Torah wears out. Then you put it into a clay container, and you bury it in the burial place of a scholar. How scholarly must he be? Well, the Shulchan Aruch says, even if he's not such a scholar, he just knew how to learn halacha, but he didn't really, hang with other Torah scholars. He was like a guy who was like what we would call a chaver kolel. He would hang out and learn all the time, and people respected him, but he wasn't one of the more learned ones. Okay, so this verse says we wear out Sefer Torah. The rule also applies to any of the books of the prophets, the Klaf Haftarahs, or also any of the Ksuvim, so any of the Megillos, as we call them. Okay, and they also have to be written on parchment and rolled and with DO, the gallnut ink that I was telling you about. Okay, so missing any one of those things is not important. And we mentioned also that, like, for example, we talked previously 5 chapters ago. Sefer HaChaim. Interesting thought. Okay. and it has to be put into a clay jar, okay, so that that protects it for the rest of his time burying. Now, it has to be buried. It's also allowed to. You also have to bury these other books as well, okay, and you can't, let's say, burn them, for example. Okay, as long as they're not, even though your intention of turning them into ashes, so that way they won't become any more mistreated as a result of hanging out there. And nonetheless, the destruction that's being done to them is also inappropriate. So you have to therefore bury them. So the Rambam brings down in the negative commandments, number 42, that someone who intentionally destroys holy books is actually violating a Torah prohibition. That prohibition is lo tasun kein lashem elokechem, which was the idea of destroying the. It's referring to the statement that you shall destroy all of the high places and the altars of the idolaters. Don't do that to God. And so too, all things that are served in the shul or in the Beis Hamikdash, all the things that have levels of holiness, also are included in this statement. We said that a Talmud Chacham has to be at least a Shona Halachos, so the Mishnah Berurah explains he has to learn Mishnah and Brisa, but he just didn't learn with other rabbis, okay? And that's they didn't learn Gemara, okay? That's his main thing. So. With those things, also, so it says you have to learn Gemara, which is explaining the Mishnah. So I guess a guy who learned Daf Yomi would be a level above this guy because he is at least learning Gemara. Okay, so halacha 6. Okay, one may not take a box and turn it into a place to rest the Sefer Torah. Okay, so you take a regular box, and now you say, you know what, I have this box. I'm going to start standing the Sefer Torah on. So that's the box. I'm going to put a little rest on top of it, but I already made the box. Okay. However, you could make a larger box into a smaller box in order to put a Sefer Torah into it. And also, you may make a larger chair into a smaller chair for a Sefer Torah. But you cannot make something known as a sharparaf, okay, which is an even smaller type of a chair. So a sharparaf could be. We'll see that in the Mishnah in a minute what that actually is. And that would be okay. And you can also go ahead and take a curtain that's larger and make it into a smaller curtain, and also to make it into a covering for the Sefer Torah. However, you cannot take something that's been used for Sefer Torah and make it into a cover for a Chumash, which we already said was basically a Sefer Torah, which is not in the rolled form, but instead into a book form. Now, the parochas, the Rama adds the following. It's the parochas that we hang in front of the Ara. Okay, so we have that. We have our own curtain that we put in front of that. It doesn't really get to take on the status of the Aron. We saw this 2 halachas ago. It just has the status of the holiness and sanctity of things that serve in the shul. Okay, and so too, the bars upon which you hang the paroches, same thing. Nonetheless, you cannot take them and turn them into these staves that you're going to hold up for helping people read the Sefer Torah, okay? Because that is not the same level of holiness. So what they used to do is they used to take a piece of wood and use it to say we're reading at this spot over here. So let's go and explain. There's a lot of details in here that don't make a lot of sense. Let's explain it in detail. Okay. So you want to try to make a chair from some other wood. Okay. So the Mishnah explains the following. So a teva, there's a larger box which was used for the storage of the Sefer Torah. It was actually the Aron Kodesh itself. So the reason why you can't take an Aron Kodesh, which wasn't clear from when I read this, I didn't look at this ahead of time. So he's saying that you can't take something that was used as an aron and then turn it into a stand for the Sefer Torah, because the Sefer Torah box that which it sits in is a constant place for it to be, and this little chair that it sits in, which is also like a little table, is only there for temporary use. Using their talit bags to hold other objects, is that kosher? Well, talis bag, as we saw before, as we mentioned before, is not the same as a tefillin bag. So talit bag would be okay. You could leave like candy in your talit bag. You could do all that stuff. Not your tefillin bag. Talis bag is less. So talis is really just begadim hamiyuchadim tefillah. It's just garments that we use for prayer purposes. So the bag is not a level of holiness, but it's a high enough level that you don't want to take it into the bathroom. Okay, so you can't do this, as we mentioned earlier. So we saw this a few halachas ago, in halacha 3. So you can't do this because you can't go from constant use to temporary use, because that would actually be a downgrade. Okay? So that would be a lower level. Okay, you also can't take the covers of the Sefer Torah and use them to be a book cover for a chumash, because that cover over there sometimes wraps the Sefer Torah. And we also mentioned that as well. And the chumash, which even though it's nice, is still a lower level of Sefer Torah. So even though if it's wrapped in a roll, if it's wrapped on a roll, it's only one book of all 5. So it's only one. It's downgraded level. It's not considered properly put together to be a Torah for a public reading. Okay, we also see, so it's prohibited to use the paroches for a number of these covers. So he says over here that okay, so it's also prohibited to wrap a cover around the Sefer Torah for wrapping around the books of the prophets for the reading of the Haftarah. And you also can't take the cover that's used on the table for the Torah reading. So you can't take the cover on the bima and put it on the lectern on the stender that the chazan uses for leading the congregation. So that's also be a lower level. The covers that are placed on the Sefer Torah can be used to beautify the basic Knesset. You can turn them into like a type of a tapestry on the wall, because the holiness of the basic Knesset is equivalent to that of the Sefer Torah in that usage. And also, the silver accoutrements of the Torah can also be used around the shul to beautify the shul, because it's not how you use it, it's the fact that it's being just placed around the building and used for holy purposes. So that holiness is considered equivalent. So we say that there's a difference between the paroches and the Aron HaKodesh, so the thing that hangs in front of it and the thing there, because of we used to wrap it around there. So nowadays, the Mishna explains, we don't take out the Sefer Torah without its own designated cover, and so therefore the paroches can actually be used to be laying on top of the table. So the only time it's strange to him is that he says sometimes people would take the paroches off of the aron and they use it as a chuppah. They put on 4 poles and hold it over the couple getting married in order for them to get married underneath it. And so he says maybe it's like we see later on. And yeah, okay. So let's see. So we also say that let's see. So you can't make pointers out of the staves either. Okay, and so we say over here is that you can't do that because they don't have the same level of sanctity as the rest of the synagogue. So even though it's used for something in the synagogue, you might think it's not any different than other things used around the synagogue to service it. But other usages, which are not in the synagogue, so things like the tefillin that people are going to wear, they don't have that same level of sanctity of the synagogue itself, even though they are used in and around the synagogue. So these pointers are a little bit different. Okay? And why? So the Mishnah further explains is that they're not sanctified, it's that they're not to beautify the synagogue, and they're not meant to drape the Sefer Torah. They're just there so that way you can point out that they should know where the reading is. So it's not the same as the actual holiness of the synagogue itself. Now, nowadays, we actually take those pointers, those same pointers, and we call them the yod. Okay, so now we actually shape them like a little hand, like a little pointer finger. Okay, and we hang them on the Sefer Torah themselves to make it's like a pretty thing to have. So therefore, you've upgraded our current ones from the ones that are being described here in the Ramah. And so therefore, if you had worn out wood or worn out metal, you could then turn it into these items. Okay. So now he's going to quote something else. In the Sefer Hasidim, in chapter 935, one may not put into the Aron Kodesh old covers, okay, because those old covers are no longer serving a Sefer Torah. The Magen Avraham says that it might be okay because people are allowed to do that, and the Eliyah Rabbah echoes that, and they also quote the book Knesses HaGedolah, that our custom is to put old covers into the Aron. Okay, however, we don't put Chumashim and other books. We don't put the Torah, the Haftarah scrolls or anything like that into the Aron itself, into that same box. Okay, in the same box the Sefer Torah is. Okay, so now if it's an Aron built into the wall, okay, so then it has the same level of the sanctity of the basic Knesses, and so therefore you could then put the other books of Nach inside of the Aron. So again, if the Aron is a separate, unattached piece of equipment, then you cannot leave other books inside of it. But if it's attached to the wall, then you could build sections in there to put old covers, to put your Megillas, to put your Nevi'im in there, and so on. So now the Mishnah quotes the Taz. Says the Taz has an issue with a certain custom that was done. He says this custom happens on Hoshana Rabbah, that after you take out all the Sifrei Torah, you take a lit candle that was on the edge of the Aron, okay, and you try to use it for some purpose. So he doesn't say what. So you take them all. I don't know what he's talking about. He says that after you take out all the Sefer Torah, you put a lit candle. And he says the problem is that it's like that the candle is serving as a wall of the Aron itself. All right. So the purpose of that item is to house Sefer Torah on a regular basis, and so even if it gets old and you want to make another one, this one is still not allowed to be used any differently than it originally was, and you can't make it into a box to house other things because it's considered a proper storage box for a Sefer Torah. However, then if you made it and put a condition on it that's only be this big for a certain amount of time, then you're going to build, and you say you're going to build a bigger Aron, okay? So when you make the second Aron, then the original one, the condition is fulfilled, and then you can use it for another purpose, like storing other books in there. That's what the Taz says. Berurah continues on his own. He says it's prohibited to use a sefer for your own purposes, so you cannot use a book, or not a book, but a scroll, to give you shade or to hide behind for your friend. Okay, so like you're trying to write a letter and you have like a stack of svarim. You can't move the svarim to give yourself some privacy. You can't use it as a privacy shield. You also can't put another sefer under another sefer that you're learning on. So you can't like lean one book on top of another book. And if you lean one scroll on top of another scroll, that would be fine. Okay. And when you're using, so for example, it's like stack. So if you lay one on top of the other one because you're reading both of them, that's fine. But to rest it on top of it, just to tilt it towards you would not be permitted. Okay, that's in the Chai Adam. When it's sunny outside and it's shining a lot on your book, okay, on your scrolls, you're reading your scroll. So you'd be allowed to protect the scroll with another scroll. Okay, so that way you can actually read the book. So, because it's not to keep the sun out of your eyes, it's to make it easier to read the other scroll. Okay, you're not allowed to go ahead and write your own notes on the side of the scroll, because notes that you write on the side are not of the same level of holiness. But if you've already written other words of Torah in it, then you could be lenient on that if it's for some other need and purpose. So, for example, you can't write commentary on the side of your book, but if you're writing other words of Torah on there, that would be okay, because that's this. So if you're saying that, like, oh, this verse is similar to another verse, and you make a little note about it, that would be okay. Let's see. Have they made an English translation of Chai Adam? I think so. I'd have to go look. I don't know if it's of the whole thing, but nowadays I know they're making a full. I just saw someone provided me with an English translation of the Aruch HaShulchan, which was the first of its kind, and it was using AI. So it was using AI to translate the whole thing, and then people were going back and checking it. Let's see. A person who has written a commentary through which there was no Divrei Torah written into it, and no other items into it, cannot be left on top of of a proper kosher sefer. You also can't write your math problems or try to use a sefer to do arithmetic. And you also can't test your pen on it to see if it's writing properly. But people should also complain and point out that it's wrong. People who tie the books, they put it on top of, and they attach it to planks. Okay. So they shouldn't do that. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what he's describing over here, but because they're holy works, and that you are, in a sense, ruining them. Okay, we know that there's a Torah prohibition on that, and if the goal is to make sure that the words aren't erased, it's still not appropriate to put them onto planks of any kind. Okay, so that's not an appropriate use of them. Okay, halacha 7. The bima, meaning the high place upon which you read the Sefer Torah. So, for example, the bima, which are meant for a king to stand upon. So it's like a stage. Okay, the bima is the stage. Does not have the holiness of the Aron. It has the holiness of the shul. Okay, so generally referring to when the Shulchan Aruch refers to the bima, even though we call it a bima, where we read the Torah, we are referring to the actual table that you're reading on. But the Shulchan Aruch is referring to the stage upon which you put the table, what you read the Sefer Torah on. But really, that bima is considered part of the holiness of the synagogue. Okay, and the Mishnah Berurah explains that this is like a place where you would stand and you would read the Sefer Torah on it, and its holiness was only in a place where the king would have stood up publicly to read the Sefer Torah, like during Hakel. But our bima, which is the one that you stand upon, which houses the Sefer Torah, that's what we're talking about here in this case. Halacha 8. So this will help wrap up some of the laws you learned today. The Aron and everything that's made for the Sefer Torah are allowed to have a condition on it that it can be used for a certain amount of time, and then it can be used later on after that condition is fulfilled to be used for a regular general purpose. And the Ramah says, and our custom is to go ahead and benefit from many different things that are meant to be used in a sacred purpose. So, for example, the covers of the books and the covers on the table that are in the shul, and the wrappings of the Sefer Torah. And the reason why it's written in our books in Ashkenaz seems to be that since this was our custom, and people weren't going to be so careful about keeping it holy all the time, so therefore the thought process of every local Beis Din was to make a condition at the outset that when they were making this holy object, this object for the purpose of servicing the holy object, so that way people wouldn't come to being inappropriate with them when their time was up. Okay? And even though they didn't make an explicit condition, we can assume that the condition was already made. Okay? So that's the difference between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, is that the Shulchan Aruch says if you make a condition, it works, and the Ramah is saying, no, we have an implied condition. So the Shulchan Aruch says that the conditions work, okay? Excuse me. Yeah. Let's see over here. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay. So the condition works, and it says that the reason why it works is that you make the condition at the outset. It doesn't matter if it was done when the Sefer Torah was there or not. Okay, as long as you do it at the initial moment of it when it's made. Okay, and it can be used for any purpose, even a general purpose. And nonetheless, you can't use it for something disgusting, like you can't use it to put dog food in it. And the reason why the Ramah says the reason why these conditions are assumed to be made at the outset is because people would otherwise not be careful with it. Okay, and since this is quoted from Rav Isserlin's Trumas Hadeshen, he proves over there that this only works by a synagogue. Okay, but the Sefer Torah, that's a personal one. You have to make the condition at the outset with that, and you can't assume that otherwise. Okay, so you have to make a condition at the outset, and so Mishna explains what does it mean making a condition at the outset. That's when you are clear what the custom is about being lenient. But if you're not sure if that's the custom, then you can't be lenient about it because maybe that they weren't thinking about it. So don't rely on this. If you have some idea of what you want it to look like, make the condition, because if you're not sure, then there's going to be some restraints on it. Okay? The Trumas Hadeshen also finishes off by saying that you can rely on an assumed condition. He says that I don't know why people aren't more particular about this. I looked really hard to see if there is a legitimate reason to do it, so that's why. So the Mishna explains that it's better that when you make the donation to the synagogue, or you give it to the people who are in charge of the synagogue, that you should make the condition yourself that it could be used for some other purpose later on when they're done using it. I think maybe we'll hold it here today. Yeah, so we're gonna come back and learn next time about more about the coverings of the Sefer Torah, and there'll be more stuff to learn about. Okay, so we will pick it up with that for next time. Thank you very much for joining. I see some extra people join towards the end. If you'd like to, we're going to upload this and it'll be available again shortly. You can also watch the first half of this Siman, which we did last week. So thank you very much for joining, and we will see you next time. Take care.